We are in Deceptions Concerning Yahweh's Calendar of Events. I know this is an old book, but this is the one that I'll be using, the old one. And look at the back of that. Isn't that beautiful? Look at that face. Look at that face, huh? That was an old picture there. But that's how he looked when... Look at that. Take a look at that. Huh? Yep. That's the way he looked when I first came here. All right. So let's see. We stopped off here on page 14 here. This was talking about the secret of Yahweh. Well, no, we stopped actually on page 12. I'm sorry, page 12 there. Talking about the appointed feast time. Now, we were into the fact that Solomon had been told to build the temple and stuff. And then he was praying. And this is when Yahweh said, my eyes will be there perpetually at my house. Okay? So, you know the word perpetually, we'll look at that. But, you know, it's the same teaching of Yada is still here today. They went against Yahweh, you know, and Israel was scattered throughout this earth. And none of them keep the laws of Yahweh. As it says back on page 11 here in 1 Kings 9:7, he says, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given to them, and this house which I have hallowed and sanctified for my name I will cast out of my sight. Israel will then become the subject of a short pointed saying and as an object of sarcasm and ridicule among all peoples. And of course that's exactly the way it is today, the way people look at it. You know, and of course now Yahda's is usually referred to as those old Jews, you know, and people practically spit when they say the word. Okay, so let's look at here. It talks about perpetually. It says, Yahweh said to 1 Yada 9 verse 3 in the King James Version that his eyes and his heart would be at the house of Yahweh perpetually. The word which has been translated perpetually comes from two other Hebrew words, which means the only required season here. So the book of the law here, which Yeshua read, and said in Exodus 13:10, you shall therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year. Okay, so it's an ordinance. Okay, it's something that has to be done to keep things in order. Okay, it's a law, and it's notice this has to be kept in its season from year to year. Okay, there's a select time for this. And this Hebrew word for season in this verse is a moada, meaning a fixed time, season, specifically a festival, or in other words, a feast. Okay, Wada then comes from the Hebrew word yad, meaning to fix upon by agreement or appointment. Notice, so it's an appointed time. Okay, it's an appointment to meet at a stated time in a certain quarter or position. Remember, the law of Yahweh says you must go to the place, seek the place. Right? It's a certain position, certain quarter. Assembly, gather selves together, meet together, and set a time. Okay, now at this appointed feast, it has to be according to Yahweh's time. Okay, and that's what we're going to look at. Now, this is Deceptions Concerning Yahweh's Calendar of Events, and if you notice on the cover, you see the obelisk, and of course you see the zodiac and so forth. And as you read about different things throughout the scriptures, you see where it talks a lot about, you know, the old rituals and things that they went through, right? Okay, so the rituals and stuff that they went through, sometimes people associate those things and they think, okay, so that's the old days, right? That's the old days where none of that stuff takes place now. You know, they don't do all these old sacrifices and hoop and holler and jump at the moon and all of these weird things and stuff, right? But that's not true. These things do take place. Because remember, there's nothing new under the sun, okay? We just recently had the winter solstice, okay, which is in the 12th Roman month, December, which is the 21st, which is the solstice, okay, which just recently celebrated. And here you see these people. My light looks like it's dim. Wow. But anyway, you see them. This is at Stonehenge, okay? And notice they're dressed in red, right? Now this here is, as it says, this is members of the Shaki Singers Choir. They sing as druids, pagans, and revelers gathering in the in the center of Stonehenge, hoping to see the sunrise, and as they take part in the winter solstice ceremony, can't speak because it's cold, I guess. The winter solstice ceremony at the ancient Neolithic monument of Stonehenge near Amesbury on December 22nd, 2011 in Winchester, England. Okay, so notice how they're wearing red, they're reaching up to the sun, okay? They're sun worshipers, okay? It's no different today. Now, it says a large crowd gathered at the famous historic stone circle. It's a UNESCO listed ancient monument, okay? UNESCO, that's the United Nations, something, whatever. But anyway, they listed this as an ancient monument to celebrate the sunrise closest to the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. The event is claimed to have more important in the pagan calendar than in the summer solstice because it marks the rebirth of the sun for the new year. Okay, so you can see that the whole world is based upon this sun worship. Now here is another one. Here we see this lady here is beating on the drum, okay, and this lady back here, she's also got a large drum there that she's beating on and stuff, okay, and it says people say hello to the sun and goodbye to the darkness as they take part in the drumming ceremony to celebrate the winter solstice, and this is in the amphitheater here in Colorado, okay, so this takes place. It's not just the around the world. It's also in the U.S. Look at this guy, okay? What he's got is he's got a winged cape, okay? Now, it says the man waves large wings in the air as the sun comes up during the drumming ceremony to celebrate the winter solstice at Red Rocks Amphitheater on December 21st in Denver, Colorado. Now, an interesting part, what struck me was when I saw that, is I saw the wings, okay? Now, the wings here, you saw, this is from the two Babylons, and it says, now it's remarkable that in the passage of Aristophanes, he speaks of the birds and the winged ones, and we're informed that both the mighty ones and the gods derive their origin by none other than the winged boy Cupid. And the boy god Cupid himself, a winged one, produced all the birds or the winged ones. So what this guy don't realize is, he's bragging that he wants to be a god, He wants to do the same thing that the gods themselves have actually done. So it just shows you how people are hung up into God worship and don't even realize it, Oh, here's another one. There's a beauty right there. Huh? Now notice this woman. She's dressed and she's got, her face is painted to appear to be like an animal, and she's got the horns of a deer there, okay? A woman watches as the sun rises during the drumming ceremony to celebrate the winter solstice and drum up the sun at Red Rocks Amphitheater again in Colorado there. But you see, okay, that's when you look at that, okay, it's bestiality, and this is the things that they do. Now, Yahweh says that, in Isaiah 1, verses 1 through, what is it, Isaiah 1, hang on there. In Isaiah 1, verses 4 through 4 and then 10 through 15, he talks about how they're a sinful nation, and he talks about against the rulers of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then, of course, Yahweh says, in 1 verse 14, he says, your new moons, your Sabbaths, your calling of assemblies, he says, I cannot endure. Even the solemn meeting is iniquity. Okay, so they turned him, notice, into their own. And as he says, your new moons, your appointments. Notice verse 14, your new moons and your appointed feast. Okay, so these were feasts that they called. Okay, mankind themselves called these things and made it their own. It wasn't. It wasn't Yahweh's, and that's the thing, is that Yahweh makes his way according to the way that he says things need to be done. And not according to man. When man takes things, he messes things up, and that's exactly what he did, is he ended up going after all of these things. You remember in Genesis 1, verses 14 through 18, okay? Yahweh said, let there be lights in the expanse of the firmament, and let them serve as signs to mark the feast for days and for years, okay? Now this is the sin that Solomon had done, is he changed what Yahweh had originally put. And it says that there be 2 great lights in the earth, and then that they'll give light upon the earth, 2 great lights in the sky, to govern the day and the night. Okay, and notice verse 18, Yahweh saw that it was right. So it was set in the very beginning that this is the way it should be. And so these signs, notice, they had signs to mark the feast, they had signs to mark the days, they had signs to mark the years. That's what the sun and the moon is used for. Each one has its own thing to do. And also the stars too, remember, he said he made the stars. Well, why did he make the stars? Because remember, they also have ordinances that they must do. In Eob 38, he says, can you bind the chains of Pleiades or loose the band of Orion? Can you bring forth the Mazarah, which is the constellations, in their seasons? Now remember, Yahweh says these laws, these seasons must come about for his feast to take place. Can you guide the Arcturus and her sons? That's the bear and the cubs, or the small, big and small dipper. Do you know the ordinance of the heavens, and can you establish their rule upon the earth? So they have rule, okay, upon this earth. They're set by law to do what they need to do. They bring forth law upon this earth, and it all deals with the fact of what Yahweh set up in the very beginning, how his feast should be kept. Okay, and that's what you got to realize, because we're going to see how man took what Yahweh originally said and he twisted it, and then he came up with his own calendar even to replace the calendar that Yahweh himself had made, okay? And so now we're getting back to that original calendar, right? We're using that original calendar that Yahweh made. And so there's no more, it should be no longer that confusion that's in the Roman calendar, starting a night, starting a day in the middle of the night at midnight, just doesn't make any sense at all, Yahweh says it's very easy. The sun rules the day, the moon rules the night. Day begins when the sun goes down, and the night begins, and then therefore day begins. So all Yahweh's laws govern all of these things, but remember too, now he said that what they did is they fell victim, Deuteronomy 4:19, and when you look up at the sky and you see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all which are arrayed in the heavens, do not be enticed to bowing down to them and worshiping things which Yahweh allotted to all the nations under heaven. Okay? It's given to everybody, because it's given to everybody to be able to know what they should be doing, but of course they bow down to it and worship it. And like it says in Romans, they worship the creation rather than the Creator himself, But of course Yahweh says something different. Okay, let's go back here where he says, the appointed feast. It says, Yahweh in effect said in 1 Kings 9:3, my eyes and my heart will be there at the appointed feast. Okay? The word heart, when he says my eyes and my heart, it means tender, courage, midst, mind, understanding. So it comes from the Hebrew word meaning in a righteous sense, transport with love. And this also comes from the Hebrew word meaning friend, merry, midst, understanding, willingly, and wisdom. So in effect, Yahweh said, I will be at the house of Yahweh at the appointed time, and I will bring you joy, love, and merriment, and understanding. And this is what you find at Yahweh's house, when you come to Yahweh's house. And notice, it's going to be at the appointed time, okay? It has to be at the appointed time, because if it's not according to Yahweh's time, it's your own time, okay? And this is what we saw in Isaiah 1:14, where Yahweh says, I hate your new moons, your feasts, and so forth. It's not mine. Well, Yahweh didn't leave Yeshua, nor Solomon, nor us guessing about the appointed time that he sets, when he will meet with his people in holy convocation, okay? Convocation means a holy gathering, okay? You gather together. And these ordinances were available to Solomon, written in the same book of the law which Yeshua read. Yahweh's weekly Sabbath. Now, the first appointed time that Yahweh sets his weekly Sabbath day was the Sabbath. You remember in the very beginning, he created man on the 6th day, and on the 7th day, the very next day of his life the first day of his life, if you want to put it that way, he was taught the Sabbath day. Okay. So in Leviticus 23, 1-3, it says, Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, Concerning the feast of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim in their holy convocations, these are my feasts. So notice, Yahweh lays claim to his ownership. He says, These are mine, okay? 6 days you shall work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work on it. It is the Sabbath of Yahweh in all your dwellings, okay? In all of your dwellings. And that's what we read when it says that this is my feast. These are my days. This is when you will meet with me. Yahweh was very, very plain in what he expected of his people. He didn't leave anyone in any doubt. We don't have to guess about the Sabbath. We don't have to guess. We don't have to change anything. You know, that's why it warns you in the book of Revelation, don't add to nor take away from. But, of course, that's in the book of Revelation. But in the Yahweh's law itself, he says, you shall not add to nor take away from my law. Okay? So you don't have to guess about something. You don't have to guess about what his name is. He tells you what his name is. You don't have to guess about what day to worship him. He tells you what day it is. You don't have to guess about anything in Yahweh's law. It's plainly written out, and it was written out before we were ever born. So it's not like, but he also says, you don't have to go all over the earth to try and find it, because it's here right in front of you. It's given to you. So by understanding Leviticus 23, 1-3, we see the weekly seventh-day Sabbath is listed as a feast of Yahweh, and most assuredly is a holy convocation which he appoints. Okay? And now notice, he appoints this. And this is the reason why Satan hates this day so much. Okay? Because it's a day when Yahweh makes with his people, it's an appointed time when they can come to him and they can learn his ways. And the Sabbath, this is why the Sabbath is so extremely important, because of the fact that this is when you come to make your appointments with your Creator, okay? And the Sabbath is a day when Yahweh feeds you with his word, okay? And so this is what makes us stronger. This is what turns us into him, so to speak, okay? As we become like him, we feed on the spiritual food on the Sabbath day. This is Yahweh's convocation. The Hebrew word translated convocation is mikvah, which means something called out, a public meeting, and it comes from the Hebrew word kara, which means to call out, to address by name, those that are bidden, call forth, invite, mention, preach, proclaim, publish, and read. Well, all these things are done on the Sabbath day, right? You hear all of these things. And through a study of these Hebrew words, we see that a holy convocation is when Yahweh calls out and then meets with his people. It's not what man set, it's what Yahweh sets, okay? The house of Yahweh, okay? Yahweh calls out his people from a world of sin and bids them to the place that he chooses to place his name. It can't be anywhere else but where he chooses. Now, if Yahweh is the creator, see, that's the thing, like it says in Hebrews, one must believe that Yahweh is who he is, and that he is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Okay? So you have to understand the name of Yahweh to know who your creator is, and then you must believe in the Sabbath. And that's the two things that anybody must first come to the understanding of, is Yahweh's name, the importance of Yahweh's name, and of keeping the Sabbath day holy. Because it's on the Sabbath that you can learn everything else that's in the whole book of Yahweh. Okay? Because that's the time when you come in this holy convocation, this holy public meeting, this gathering, to hear the preaching and the publishing and the proclaiming of the message of Yahweh. And through a study of these Hebrew words, we can see that a holy convocation is when Yahweh calls out and then meets with his people. Remember what Yahshua said, no one can come to me except my Father draws him. He must call them, okay? So we have to answer that calling. The choice is ours. We choose which way we want to go. You can stay home, it's raining, it's too muddy, whatever, I don't feel, I'll just stay home and watch it on the internet, Yeah, you can choose to do that. You just stole it from Yahweh, and you just lost a very, very invaluable lesson when you did that, because you weren't here to hear it firsthand. When you can be here, you must be here. There ain't no two ways about it, There's no two ways about it. So 1 Timothy 3:15. Well, you know, I remember what Pastor, the words that Pastor said should ring in our ears. He said, you know, I've heard that man get up here before, years and years and years ago, when he got up and he could barely speak. And you could just see that he was just struggling so hard to be able to speak in his voice. You could just hear it all in his voice. He felt like, you know what. But he said, you know, I can't not do this, because if I did, then Satan could use it against me every time. You know? And so he never gives in to it, and that's why he's always said, you know, even if you're to the point of death, come to services, you know. Come here and be here. Because it's so important to be here for what we hear. Now, it says, Yahweh calls out his people. He chooses that place, okay? 1 Timothy 3:15 says, if I tarry long, that thou mayest know how thou... This is the King James Version, I think. He says, but if I tarry long, that thou may knowest how thou oughtest to behave thyself in the house of Yahweh, which is the assembly of the living Father and the pillar in the ground of the truth. Okay? You know, whether one believes it or not, Yahweh's at his house. You know? It doesn't matter what people believe that or not. It really don't matter. You know? Nothing matters. Yahweh is Yahweh. Yahweh's truth and his laws are truth. If somebody doesn't want to accept that, then, you know, they simply don't. It's their choice. But when Yahweh opens a person's mind, they should really use it, you know, and not leave his house and the only work that there is on the face of this earth. You know, it's a shame that people do. But Yahweh's true work is written within the pages of the Holy Scriptures. It's written in a way which is not easily understood by the masses of people who will not study their own Bibles. Yet with just a little study of the original Hebrew words, anyone can come to a complete understanding of the true work of Yahweh in these last days. In Amos 3, verses 6 and 7, it says, we read in the King James Version, shall a trumpet be blown in the city, and the people not be afraid? Shall there be evil in the city, and Yahweh has not done it? Surely Yahweh will do nothing. You know, he's in complete control, right? Surely Yahweh will do nothing, but he reveals his secret to his servants, the prophets. Okay? So you can see why it's so important to practice what Yahshua said in Luke 24:25, to believe all that the prophets have spoken, right? Because he tells you he's going to reveal his secrets through the prophecies. But you can only have that mind of understanding if you come to Yahweh's house and meet with Yahweh so that he can reveal these things to us. So notice the last phrase, has Yahweh not done this? Okay? Then if you've got a King James Version with a center reference, you can see that it says, or shall not Yahweh do somewhat? Okay? Well, with this correction placed back in Amos 3:6, it's plain to see that the prophet Amos was asking a question. Will those other things be done, and shall not Yahweh do somewhat? By Amos 3:6 being corrected in this manner, one can see Amos is making a point with this question. He's saying, shall there be evil in a city, and will not Yahweh also have a work in that city? In other words, Amos is saying, will Satan's preachers be working in a city, any city, and Yahweh not have a work there? So, you know, Yahweh calls those whom he wills. Not everyone will answer, but Yahweh does call, right? He calls those people out to whom he wants to be in his house. Well, the Hebrew word translated secret in Amos 3:7 has been translated assembly in various other scriptures like Psalm 89:7, Psalm 111:1, Jeremiah 15:17, and Yechezkel 13:9. But this Hebrew word translated secret is number 5475 in Strong's, and it means a session, a company of persons in close deliberation. By implications, intimacy. Intimacy. Well, remember, Yahweh wants a personal family, right? He desires to have a personal family. So this is something that's intimate. You're being invited to be a part of Yahweh's own personal family. You know, the family of priests. Because remember, people are going to have eternal life, but not everyone is going to be part of the immediate family of Yahweh. These sons and daughters that the whole universe is waiting to be revealed, That's the special group. That's the special treasure that Yahweh is looking to reveal to everyone. Notice it also means consultation, okay? Well, if you remember in Isaiah 1:18, he says, come now, let us reason together. Okay, let us consult together, because though your sins be as scarlet, yet I'll make them as white as snow. Okay, because your sins can be cleansed. You can be wiped away. You can get rid of this stuff if you will come and do what you're supposed to do and be obedient. Notice it also means a secret. Well, if you remember Deuteronomy 29:29, it says, the secret things belong to Yahweh our Father, but the things revealed to us, okay, so the secret things belong to Yahweh, but the things that belong to us, that is, every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh's law, prophets, this belongs to our children forever, okay? So Yahweh is revealing these things to his people, and so when he reveals these things, we understand these things, because remember, all understanding comes from Yahweh, all right? It's that spirit of understanding. So the prophet of Moshe is saying, surely Yahweh will do nothing, but he reveals his assembly unto his servants, the prophets. So you see, his prophets have to be able to reveal who that assembly is that's going to be. Okay? And so this is why we can stand and rest assured that we know that it's the house of Yahweh. Okay? Because, that's one of the things that are written that it's spoken of even in Numbers. I think it's Numbers 12:7, where it says that Yahweh testifies about Moshe, and he says, Moshe was faithful in all my house. Okay? So Yahweh himself is talking about my house, okay? And that's in the King James Version. You have that there. So it shows you that this is Yahweh's house. So he says he's not going to have any work except it's foretold first by the prophets. So Yahweh won't have any work unless he first foretold it of that assembly through his prophets. So that's the only way that you can know that it's authorized, right? There's a bunch of assemblies out there, and a bunch of them use Yahweh's name and have Yahweh's name tagged on to their titles and so forth, but they're not authorized. They're not authorized by the prophets, okay? You have to be mentioned by the prophets in order to have authority. And this is what Yahshua said over and over and over again. Have you not read? Do you not know that Moshe spoke of me? And so forth, Over and over and over again, he reiterated that to the people. Well, this word secret, which has been translated assembly, comes from number 5475, and it comes from 3545, which is Yasad, and it means to found, okay, to settle, to consult, to appoint, to take counsel, to establish, to lay a foundation, lay or ordain or set, okay? Now, that should make us think about some things when it says it means to found, okay? It's the foundation of Yahweh's house, right? And if you remember, it means to settle. Remember 2 Samuel 20:18. It was spoken long ago from the beginning. In order to settle a matter, you go to Abel, right? You go to Abel. You go to the house of Yahweh. Long ago, if you want to settle a matter. It also means appoint. Well, you remember Yahweh says in Isaiah 44, verse 7, who as I have appointed them to foretell these things. Okay, so all of these things are mentioned in the scriptures as we read these things. So this assembly, it's set and it's founded. It means to be established, okay, which the house of Yahweh was, in Micaiah 4:1, Isaiah 2:2, in the last days it would be established. So in effect, Yahweh's inspired Moshe to write that he would establish no assembly unless he prophesied of it first through the prophets of old. It's sad, but many deceived preachers in the churches and assemblies, they use or will use the facts from Moshe 3, 6, and 7 to claim that it proves that their assembly is authorized. Okay? And that is the true faith. However, the Apostle Shaul clearly identifies the names of the assembly spoken of by the prophet of Moshe. In 1 Timothy, 1 Timothy 3:15, he says, but if I tarry long, that thou mayest know how thou ought to behave thyself in the house of Yahweh, which is the assembly of the living Father, the pillar and the ground of the truth. Now, the pillar and the ground of the truth, if you want to go back to the beginning, if you remember what occurred here in Genesis 28, 22, when Jacob was laying down and he said, this stone, this great rock of Abel, I have set as a pillar, shall be Yahweh's house, and all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth. In other words, he was talking about tithing there. Okay, so he plainly says this pillar, it's Yahweh's house. Okay, like it says here, it's the pillar and the ground of the truth. And of course, the truth is Yahweh's laws, right? So this word has been translated assembly in the Holy Name version. I don't know if you ever seen the Holy Name version. We used to use those years ago in the assemblies. It's basically King James version. It's just got the names Yahweh and Yahshua put in the places there. But however, it still has the word Elohim and stuff like that. So it's really of no value because it's still teaching God worship. But the King James version says assembly or church is the word. It's used as number 1577 in the Strongs. And notice it's ecclesia. The word ecclesia, and it means a calling out. A calling out. A popular meeting, a religious congregation, notice. Or if you notice, the community of members on earth or the saints. Okay? Saints in heaven or both. But of course we know the saints are not in heaven. The saints, the reason why they put that in there, because again, you got to know what the meaning of the word saint is. Okay, the word saint means one who keeps the whole law here on earth. But the word saint is also translated talking about the Malachim as well, the heavenly Malachim. So that's why they put that kind of stuff in here. But you have to study this. You have to study to know these things. Otherwise, you'll be thinking that there's saints in heaven. Like the Catholic Church teaches, because that's the kind of stuff they would read that and they'd say, "See, that's talking about the saints up in heaven." Well, yeah. And the next thing you know, you'd be standing at the pearly gates someplace. I wonder what cloud that is. On a clear day, it's like you can't see heaven, I guess, It just blows away. But that's their foolishness. Now, this word 1577, it comes from two other Greek words, 1537 and 2564. Now, 1537 means it's a primary preposition denoting origin. Okay, denoting origin, the point whence motion or action proceeds. Okay, now remember, it denotes origin. Well, what did Yahweh tell us? Remember, Yahshua said, "No man can come to me unless the Father draws him." Okay, so you have to be drawn by Yahweh, and that's why he said, "Not everyone has heard the Father, has learned of him, and comes to me." Now, let's look at that verse, because this is something that's got to stick in your head. He said, "No man can come to me unless the Father who has sent me draws him, and I will establish him as a priest in the last day. It is written in the prophets," notice, "that they all will be taught by Yahweh. Therefore, everyone who has heard the Father," this is very important, "everyone who has heard the Father and has learned from him comes to me." Okay? You have to learn this from the Father. Yahweh is the one who opens a person's mind and allows them to learn of these things. Okay? So, remember that. This is why it's called a calling out. Okay? It also refers to heavenly, very highly, because you're highly thought upon in the heavens. And number 2564 means to call forth. Yahweh calls you. That's an invitation that he gives to you. And you answer it, and you come to his house. Now, the origin, notice on page 16, the origin of the called out assembly is through Yahweh, who specifically names the house of Yahweh through his prophets of old. 1 Nehemiah 3:15, properly translated in the book of Yahweh, reads, "And if I am delayed, I write so that you may know the right and the proper way to conduct yourself." Okay? There is a right and proper way, and there's also a wrong and improper way. And that's what's taught in the churches, okay? But there's a righteous way. There's a proper way to conduct yourself, okay? Conduct, is the way in which you carry yourself, the way that you carry yourself in front of others and with interaction and so forth, okay? And that's when your true character comes out and is shown. So it's a proper way to conduct yourself in the house of Yahweh. It doesn't just mean inside this room, okay? Don't just mean when you come to here in the sanctuary itself. In the house of Yahweh. You are in the house of Yahweh no matter where you are on the face of this earth. If you're a part of the house of Yahweh, you are in the house of Yahweh, okay? So, a proper way to conduct yourself in the house of Yahweh, who are the called out ones of the living Father. Notice, they're the called out ones. Yahweh called you out. Now, He knew of you before the earth was ever created. Before this solar system was ever created, before the universe itself was ever created, you were already known. Yahweh had you in His plan. He just went along and made all of these things, and then the time came along when everything went right according to His plan, exactly according to His plan. Then the time came where you would be born. After trillions of people have already been born on this earth, then you were born. But of course you weren't born righteous, were you? You were born with the mind that hated your Creator. And you lived it. You lived any life any way that you wanted. But He allowed that. That was all part of His plan. You know, He could have called you from birth if He wanted, like He did the prophet Jeremiah and so forth, right? And the pastor. But He didn't do that. He waited and called you out at a proper time. He called you out. That gene woke up in your mind snapped open, something triggered, and from that moment on, you made the choice as to whether you wanted to follow Yahweh or not. But now you must keep that determination in your mind. And this is where you have to deal with the daily grind, day in and day out. But Yahweh gives us all the tools that we need to be able to handle it. So Shaul, the Apostle Shaul clearly identifies the house of Yahweh as the assembly. This is the called out ones that was named by Moshe, Micaiah, and Isaiah, because they said it would be established in the last days. So he gives you the time period, the exact time period when this house would be established, and what the name of it would be. Now, and this would be spoken of by the prophets. Now remember what we said earlier, by the prophets. Remember Yahshua said back here he says, everyone who has heard my Father and has learned from Him comes to me. Okay? So if you have, in verse 46, he says, for if you had believed Moshe, who's Moshe? He was a prophet, right? Had you believed Moshe, you would have believed me, because he wrote about me. Well, why is it important to believe in Moshe? You know, Moshe stood for the law and the prophets. And this is why Yahshua said we have to believe these things, okay? We've got to, because remember, He said that this would be the reason. Well, let's go to it here. Told you Numbers 12:7. Oh, well, I tell you what, we're having a great time tonight. Numbers 12:7. Not so with my servant Moshe, he is faithful in all my house. Okay, so now this is a verse that you might want to write down and keep in mind, because if you ever have to talk to somebody, you can show them the house of Yahweh. Yes, it is the house of Yahweh. Why is it called the house of Yahweh? It's not called the church. It's not called the assembly of Yahweh. It's not called the church of Yahweh. It's the house of Yahweh, okay? Then we see here in Hebrews 3, he says, therefore, holy brothers, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle, consider Yahshua, a high priest of our profession, Yahshua Messiah. This is what we profess, right? That he is the high priest of the house of Yahweh, who was faithful to him who begot him, just as Moshe was faithful in all Yahweh's house. Okay, and he's quoting Numbers 12:7 there. Now Moshe truly was faithful as a manager in all of the house of Yahweh, as a testimony, notice, as a testimony to those things which were to be spoken after. And of course, what to be spoken after would be that the coming of the prophecies, it says that the house of Yahweh would be established in the last days. That the Messiah as the Son is over Yahweh's own house, whose house we are, if we hold fast the confidence and the rejoicing of the hope firm into the end. Okay? And you can find those things in the King James Version too. So people can't get out of it. You know, it's there. They read over it. You never hear any preachers quote those things, because they don't want to admit it, because it points out their sin. So what prophets? What prophets are we talking about? Well, it's obvious that Yahweh was not speaking of today's so-called prophets, right? In Moshe 3, 6, and 7, So does Yahweh show what prophets he was speaking about when he inspired the prophet Moshe to write this? Yes, he does. In Luke 1, verse 70, he says, "And he, Yahweh, spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets, which had been since the world began." Acts 3:18 says, "By those things which Yahweh before had showed by the mouth of all his prophets, that Messiah would suffer, so he has fulfilled." So we can see here, they talk about his prophets. Now remember what First Kepha says, Second Kepha 1:20-21, knowing that first that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. So that blows away the fact that these things just felt it in the heart, right? They just felt it in the heart, and they decided to go out and stand on the soapbox and preach, right? Knowing this first, no prophecy is of Scripture no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. For the prophecy did not come in former times by the will of man, but holy men of Yahweh spoke as they were moved by Spirit holy. Okay? And so it has to be done according to the way that Yahweh says it needs to be done. Otherwise, it's not the work of Yahweh. It's the work of man's own imagination. Okay? So, we see here in Romans 1:1-2, Shaul, the servant of Yahshua Messiah, called to be an apostle. Notice he was called. Yahweh called him out. He answered that calling and became an apostle. What's an apostle? What's an apostle? One sent, right? So he was sent out. Separated by the message of Yahweh, notice. Separated unto the message of Yahweh. You see, he was sent out for a reason. One reason only, and that was to bring forth the message of Yahweh. Which message he has promised afore by his servants in the Holy Scriptures. Notice that. He's promised these things. He's given all of these promises to his people whom he has called out, and he has spoken through the prophets about. All of our history is spoken of through the prophets. And that's the wonderful thing of Yahweh. Is that everything that we're doing today is spoken to the prophets. We go back and we see that all of these things that the prophets spoke are being fulfilled in our very lives today. Okay? And that's why Yahweh did this. That's why he had all of this work before him with all of the prophets and the holy men and women of old, the things that they did, the examples that they set, keeping the law and showing us the interpretation of these things. All these things were written for us, for our example in these last days, because we are the ones who are fulfilling everything that's written in the book of Yahweh. We are the ones who are going to usher in the kingdom of Yahweh. We are the ones who's going to resurrect the dead. We are the ones who's going to teach those resurrected beings. We are the ones who's going to judge them as to whether they're going to have eternal life or not. See? All of these things, the promises are given unto us in the Scriptures. So this is why he says it's so important. This is why Pastor talked about on Sabbath, the things that we have to work on to get these things out of our lives to become perfected. Okay? We want to be perfected by Passover so Yahweh can pass over us with his protection, right? So, if you will believe what your own Bible says, then you will believe that the prophets and the law prophesied until Yochanan the Immerser. And that's exactly what Yahshua said. Because Yahweh will have no work, no assembly, unless the prophets up to Yahshua the Immerser prophesied of it. Because Yahweh, in fact, he doesn't recognize any work. Okay, he doesn't recognize any of those work if it's not inspired and it's not done in his name, in his authority, in his character. Okay? Because Yahweh didn't send these. Remember, it says in Jeremiah 23:21-22 that I have not sent these prophets, yet they ran. I've not spoken to them. I've not spoken to them through the prophets, yet they prophesied. So if they weren't spoken of by the prophets, then this means their own words. And this was their own work. Remember when the people came to Yahshua and they said, "What work can we do to enter into the kingdom of Yahweh?" And he says, the work's already set here. You just need to believe. You need to believe in the one sent. You can't go off and do your own works and expect to get into the kingdom. You must do the work of Yahweh and believe in the one whom Yahweh has sent. But he says, notice, he says, but had they stood in my counsel, remember Yahweh says, come, let us reason together. Okay? Had they stood in my counsel and caused my people to hear my words, then they would have turned from the evil way. You remember what Yahshua said in Yochanan 6:45? If you hear the words of my Father, then you can believe in me. Okay? Had they heard my words, notice, they would have turned from the evil way. But instead, they didn't. They turned to their own doings and did what they wanted to do. How were Yeshua, Messiah, and Yochanan the Immerser sent? Well, it's very simple. They were spoken of by the prophets of old. Okay? That's how Yahshua, Messiah, had his authority. That's how Yochanan the Immerser had his authority. And that's how the house of Yahweh has its authority today, being sent by Yahweh as being spoken of through the prophets of old. Now, the word house in the Hebrew is Beth, and in the Greek it's oikos. It has two meanings. It means the building where Yahweh chooses to place his name, and also the family of Yahweh. Okay, those whom Yahweh calls out to choose to be a part of his family. You remember here in, let me bump this down, where Yahweh says, hang on just a second. Okay, now. In Ephesians 2:19, therefore now you are no longer strangers, you're no longer foreigners, but you're fellow citizens and saints and members of the house of Yahweh. Now the King James Version has the household of Yahweh there. So who is this household composed of? Well, in Ephesians 3:14 and 15 it says, for this very reason I bow my knees to Yahweh, the Father of our King, Yahshua Messiah, from whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named. The name Yahweh. Now that is so mind-boggling and so incredible that you could just talk for hours and hours and hours and hours about the beauty of what is written there and the depth that is written there, because of the fact that these things are written, but yet no one understands it. But we have been given a mind of understanding. But you have to study. You have to show yourself approved. Remember, study to show yourself approved to Yahweh. A workman who doesn't need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Okay? Now, Yahweh's Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is one of the appointed times. So the next appointed time, which will be coming up on the next feast, right? When Yahweh's eyes and his heart, as we began in the very beginning when we started the class, the appointed time when Yahweh's eyes and hearts will be with his people is listed in Leviticus 23, verses 4 through 6. These are the feast of Yahweh, his holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at the appointed seasons. So notice, there is ownership here, okay? These are the feast of Yahweh, it's his holy convocations. And then notice he gives you instructions, which you shall proclaim at the appointed season. So he tells you this is when it is. Now it's up to you to proclaim it and then keep this law and be there. On the 14th day of the first moon, between the two evenings, Yahweh's Passover sacrifice is to be killed. Now why between the two evenings? Why this particular time? Yahweh has all this in mind. He has it all planned long before he ever created man for a specific reason. And on the 15th day of the same moon is the Feast of Unleavened Bread to Yahweh. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. Okay? So between the two evenings is approximately 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. That's between the two evenings. But the thing is that that's when the sacrifices were put to death. They were killed. And so therefore that's the reason why Yahshua, as the Passover lamb, was hanging on the tree and it died at the exact time when that first lamb was going to be killed. Okay, now Yahweh was very precise. He already had this plan thousands and thousands of years ago. Put it in the hearts and minds of the people that at this exact time of the day, they were to go and to get the lamb and to slaughter that first lamb at that exact time of the day. And that was the exact time of the day when Yahshua died. Okay? And then, of course, when the sun went down, the 15th day came, that's when they ate the Passover. Okay? And that's what we do. When we celebrate Yahshua's memorial on the night that he was betrayed at that exact time, and then the following day, we rejoice with the fact that we can we're worthy, as it says. If you notice at the Passover at the Seder, it always says, we praise you, Yahweh, that we are worthy to be able to come and keep the Seder with you, right? It represents the marriage supper that we're going to be meeting with him. And so we have that great opportunity to be able to be Yahweh willing. Everybody will be in Yahweh Shema, right? Okay, so during the feast of Yahweh, these are the appointed times, his holy convocations. But notice also that they must also be in their season, okay, at the set time that Yahweh sets. You remember in page 12, it talked about the appointed feast, the appointed seasons. In their season, you must keep this ordinance in its season from year to year, okay? It has to be done at the exact time that Yahweh chooses and says that it must be done. And this is why it's so important for the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day comes around every week. It's a constant repetition as a reminder to us why we need Yahweh, you know, and how his calendar is completely accurate. It doesn't need to be changed. It's every seventh day is the Sabbath. You can't get any plainer than that. You count off 6 days, and guess what? You're going to come to the Sabbath. You count off another 6 days, and what? You're going to come to the Sabbath. It never changes. It's fixed, as this word means. It's a fixed time, and it's governed by the sun and the moon. The sun goes down. You see the moon. A new day begins. The sun goes down again, and another day begins. So the Sabbath is from sunset to sunset, as the Scripture tells you. It even gets he even got so specific in the fact that he says, look, in case you still can't figure it out, how to keep Day of Atonement, you keep it from when the sun goes down this day until the sun goes down this day, you know. So he doesn't leave us in doubt at all of how specific his law is and how easy it is written down and how easy it is to tell time, you know. But the Sabbath is so extremely important because that's when we're being made into Yahweh's likeness, into his image and his likeness, by coming to the Sabbath day. And that's why it's so extremely important, because this is the time that he appointed to meet with us. And so in Exodus 23, 13 through 15, he says, in all things I have said to you, be careful to do them. So notice he warns, be careful to do these things. Make no mention and do not invoke the name of any hinder god. Neither let this be heard from your mouth. Well, what's that all about? This is the reason why thousands and millions and trillions and billions and so forth, eons, we'll just say that, right, ago, when Yahweh had it in his plan that the time would come when we would learn these things and know how to keep his feast and keep these things, and then a certain time period when the growth of Yahweh would take place, he would reveal to his people, once again, his calendar. Now, we always knew to keep the feasts, how to keep the feasts and so forth, but we always had that pagan year in there, you know. And we always had these verses in there as reminders, you know, that these were the names of gods. But we still called it by the pagan names, didn't we? The only thing we called right was the Sabbath. And so now at this certain time, this is what's befitting about this book, is that Yahweh opened the mind of his servant Israel to bring forth the calendar that he originally made in the very beginning of Genesis. And I'm sure if we can look to the prophets and so forth, and it's written in the word of Yahweh, he didn't just pick these names for no reason, just because he thought that they were a pretty great sounding name, you know. Let's call this moon Yahshua. Let's call this moon Isaiah. Let's call this moon Yahweh. Yeah, it's the first day. Hey, it's the first moon. Hey, let's call it Yahweh. Yeah, let's do that. No, all these things were done through inspiration. One day you're going to find out about it, right? We're going to see. Now, Yahweh may hold us off into the kingdom when we're sitting in class one day, and he says, okay, now I'm going to reveal this to you and show us exactly. Right there, man. We read over it 1 billion times. We've never seen it before, you know. It's right there, you know. But that's the way that Yahweh is. He's very precise, and he inspires every little thing that goes on, okay? But it's all written in his law and his prophets. We just don't see, you know, like the old saying goes, read in between the lines. We just don't see the meaning of every word. when a subconscious mind is given to us, when you read Yahweh's scriptures, it's going to be like something you've never, ever read before. Because every word has many, 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 many different meanings to it. Some are positive, some are negative. Some same words can have a positive or negative meaning to it, and then you have the understanding fully of what it means to read and to study Yahweh's word and to fully understand it. But that's the great blessing that Yahweh is going to give us. Okay, so it says this. So this is the reason he says, "Be careful not to do this. Don't make mention of any, invoke the name of any hidden god." So he gives us his calendar, and that's the reason why we're going through this book, Deceptions Concerning Yahweh's Calendar of Events. Okay, because Yahweh's calendar is not just a calendar that's set up just so we know when the Sabbath is. It's every seventh day. Oh, the feast is coming up. Great, we can all get together and keep the feast. Yeah. It's a calendar of events. Okay? Every feast that Yahweh has meaning to it. Every day of that feast has meaning to it. And so these things are written down for us so that we might observe these days and learn these days and keep them so we can have a little bit more understanding of Yahweh's plan being revealed to us. And when that takes place, then we'll become a little bit more like Yahweh. Okay? So he says, 3 times in the year you shall keep a feast to me. Remember, Yahweh says that I'm out of 2 or 3 witnesses, right? So he's witnessing, come and keep a feast to me. You shall keep the feast, because remember, it's not just 3 times a year, but it's 3 times a year that you must be at that place. Those other feasts, you can keep in your own dwelling, but there are 3 feasts that are called the pilgrimage feast, which you must go to the place where Yahweh has chosen. Otherwise, it's not his feast. You're not keeping his feast. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded you, at the time appointed, at the moon of green ears of barley. For in it you came out of Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. There's so many different things that are contained in that one verse there. When he talks about keeping, first he says you shall keep the feast of unleavened bread, then he tells you how to do it, You must eat unleavened bread 7 days. Well, he didn't say 5 days, 3 days, 4 days, right? And this is where people mess up. This is why it says, millions and millions of people keep Passover wrong, Pentecost wrong, because they don't know. They don't read the scriptures. He says you must eat unleavened bread 7 days. And then he says, you begin your count of the Omer on the day after the Sabbath, right? So it has to be the day after the Sabbath. Well, what Sabbath? It's a weekly Sabbath. Oh, okay, weekly Sabbath. Okay, Sabbath is a Sabbath, so it's got to be the weekly Sabbath. Yeah, it's a weekly Sabbath. Okay, well then, if the feast starts in the middle of the week and so forth, you got all of these days that you got to wait. That means you could wait anywhere from 1 to 6 days before you eat unleavened bread, because you got to wait to the day after the Sabbath and so forth, right? So if the feast begins before Sabbath, you got to wait all the way to the end of the Sabbath, towards the end of the feast, before you start eating unleavened bread. Duh! If they just think these things through, how Yahweh says it's so easy, the more after the Sabbath, you start your count. You must eat unleavened bread 7 days. You can't wait for the Sabbath to roll around before you can start eating unleavened bread, or you'd be breaking the law. It's just so plain and simple. Yet that's what confuses their minds, because it is so plain and simple. That's why Yahweh says He made the simple ones wise. All right. So He gives the appointed time. He tells you about the green ears and so forth. So He says you must eat unleavened bread 7 days as commanded you at the appointed time of the moon of green ears. So He also tells us when to look, what moon. He tells us what moon to look for. He tells us when it's going to take place in the seasons and so forth. And it's a reminder that we came out of Egypt and none shall appear before Him empty. In other words, we have to have those offerings that we come before Him. So we're going to stop here on page 17. Go next week and take off on page 18. May Yahweh bless your week, man.